Japan is the ultimate untapped market. There's an entire country full of people that don't have anything Western. So let's go there. Let's figure it out. Let's open Japan up, right? And so probably the most significant thing that the hapless President Millard Fillmore does is this. Millard Fillmore took over after the 1850 death of Whig President Zachary Taylor from gastroenteritis. And so Taylor, old rough and ready, had won the Mexican War, got elected president, and then died. Millard Fillmore is his vice president. So Fillmore sends Commodore Matthew Galbraith Perry to Japan. And so this is Commodore Perry. Please not to confuse Matthew Galbraith Perry with Friends actor Matthew Perry, Canadian Friends TV actor Matthew Perry. Different individuals, right? So Commodore Perry takes a squadron of American ships over to Japan, and he greets the Japanese. He goes to Edo Bay, Tokyo Bay, and he greets the Japanese. The Japanese are very polite. So sorry, not interested. You're foreign stuff. You're a foreigner. You smell bad, and you're hairy, and disgusting, and ugly, and we don't like you, and your stuff is inferior, and it's bad and ugly, and you're stupid. But they're very polite, and they say no, thank you. Right? The British had in the 1780s sent a trade mission to China, and they demonstrated a steam engine to the Chinese emperor. And the Chinese emperor was like, "Well, I don't need a steam engine. I have like horses and slaves and stuff." And the British were like, "But like steam engines," and the Chinese were like, thanks, but no thanks. And so that was the end of that, right? And so Perry doesn't take no for an answer. Instead, in a vivid display of the technological superiority of the United States, he uses cannons to level some buildings in Tokyo and demonstrates the military and industrial superiority of the American government and Navy. The Japanese had this sort of gut check moment, right? You're the Japanese. You're the most sophisticated, cultured people in the world. Your art is superior, your food is superior, your clothing is superior, your aesthetics are superior. Everyone else is barbarians. Right? The slur that's often used to describe foreigners in Japan, gaijin, literally means barbarian. And so that's just obvious. And yet, here's this barbarian who smells bad and eats dairy like he's an animal or something. He just demonstrated that he has technology the likes of which you can only dream, right? And so it really requires you to rethink where you are in the world, right? And so if the Americans are so inferior, why are they in your harbor blowing up your shit instead of the other way around? And so what happens is a group of army officers and military men go to the emperor. His name is Beijing. And they say to Emperor Beijing, what if we overthrew the shogun? The shogun's government is what has kept us in this deep freeze. They've kept us from developing technology and dealing with the outside world. What if we overthrew the shogun and restored the emperor to his rightful place in Japanese history? And so that's why they refer to this as the Beijing Restoration, right? And so Meiji agrees, and the officers overthrow the shogun, execute him, and they change the Japanese government. And so Japan sort of enters the modern world in the 1850s. And so it's somewhat complicated. The Japanese, we like to think of them at the time as having a democracy. It's sort of democracy adjacent, maybe. There's still the emperor. In theory, there are some elections, although limited numbers of people vote. In theory, there's mass political participation, but not really, and it retains a lot of its sort of aristocratic features, right? So it's sort of democracy-ish like. But the idea behind this is that the emperor's government restored his rightful place as the ruler of Japan, right? And so what the Beijing Restoration does is it emphatically adopts the sort of if you can't beat them, join them attitude, right? If Europeans can defeat us, then we must become like the Europeans, right? So they import Americans, and they build railroads and factories, lay telegraph wires. They get the British to build them a navy. They get Germans and American soldiers to come train their armies. In the 1870s, American Civil War veterans go to Japan and train the Japanese military. There's a revolt by a samurai in southern Japan, which is crushed by the Japanese government using in part imported soldiers and weapons. This is called the Satsuma Rebellion. And so the Japanese sort of adopt all of this foreign technology, right? And they have this very nice little balancing act where they try to keep the things that make them Japanese, while at the same time jettisoning the technology that they view as outdated, right? And in some ways they succeed, and in some they don't. But the Japanese government decides, like, look, if foreigners can outpace us so much, then perhaps it is they're doing something right after all, right? And we have to figure what it is and copy it, right? And so this is a very interesting thing. On the one hand, did the Japanese benefit? Well, certainly the ones that died in the Beijing Restoration did not. On the other hand, the standard of life for Japanese people does increase. The things like electricity, modern medicine, running water in cities, modern building construction, Modern agricultural techniques increase the food yield. Foreign trade makes people wealthier. Consumer goods become widely available. Photographs, clothing, textile factories, mass-produced household objects. All those things become an increasingly common sight in Japan. On the other hand, this also leads directly to Japanese participation in both World War I and World War II. Where, of course, the other thing that if you're Japan, what do other countries do? They have colonies, right? Japan has to have colonies too. We have to keep up, right? And so the Japanese start acquiring colonies. And as we'll see, their acquisition of colonies is going to be one of the things that leads them into a course, a collision course with us in World War II, right? And when we go to war with them in World War II, they're very confused. They think, we're just doing the things that you Americans did, colonies, right? You have Philippines, we have Korea. Why is it that when you have colonies it's fine and when we have colonies it's time for World War II, right? Yeah.
Is that because when they fought the Russians, that's why they started to look at the world stage?
Oh yeah, they go to war. The Russians have Port Arthur, and the Japanese want more Port Arthur to go to war, and they crush the Russians.
Do you think that the Russians were following that they were more civilized?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are Japanese people. My God, they're basically just like
because they thought
they're just apes in suits, right? I mean, they're Asians. Asians don't win wars against the Anglo-Saxons. Yeah. And so if you're the Tsar, it doesn't even. First of all, you really need a victory because everyone hates you, and you would love that, right? But also, like, it's sort of like, am I going to go outside and there's a 5-year-old? Am I going to get in a fight with him and win? Of course I am. He's a 5-year-old kid, right? So if you're the Tsar, it's like, we're going to go to war with Russia. Are we going to win? It's like, of course we're going to war with Japan. Are we going to win? Of course it's the Japanese. Like 30 years ago, they were fighting with swords and stuff, right? We're Russia.
That's what made them really want it.
Absolutely. They thought that not only was this a war they could win, but it would be a war they would win easily. Because, of course, Asians don't win wars.
And because they lost, Japan decided to really...
I mean, and if you're Japanese, it was what a morale boost. You didn't win a war. You beat the Chinese, but like, whatever. But then you beat the Russians. It's like Russia, the biggest land area in the whole world. You defeated the Russians. You didn't win. You crushed them. And so if you're the Japanese military, it's like, maybe we can beat anybody. Because we can beat the Russians and the Chinese. Who can we beat? America, whatever. And so definitely in like the 1940s, there's this sense the Japanese have of the inevitability of course we would win against anybody. I mean, anybody we fought we would defeat because we're the Japanese, we won these other wars, why not, right? The first time the Japanese lose, it's against Russia in 1937. They invade Eastern Russia, the Russians crush them at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol. And the Japanese don't learn a lesson from that at all. The lesson is not that Europeans might be tougher than us, it's that I don't understand what you're talking about. Anyway, we won against the Russians that one time, so let's go to war with America. How about that? We would win inevitably.
Did they have colonies before the Russians attacked them?
They had, in the 19th century they got Taiwan.
It was 1904 when they attacked them.
Yeah, Taiwan, parts of China, Okinawa, some islands in the South Pacific, stuff like that. Korea, like a little bit of South Korea, yeah. But yeah, for the Japanese, the lesson always was, like, we won one time, so we can win anytime, right? And if we're smart, tough, and strong, and fast, and good, technology's good, so why not take risks, right? And they thought that just like the Russians, if they defeated us at Pearl Harbor, we would just fold like a wet rag. I mean, it was just one good solid punch to the jaw, just like you did to the Russians, and that'll be it, right? It's like, no, that's the opposite. Like, Pearl Harbor, not only did you not damage the American Navy very seriously, you also enraged us to the point where we were reset at nothing less than total defeat. Because the British at one point proposed, like, let's go easy on Japan, and we were like, let's kill everyone in Japan. How about that? Roosevelt pointed out to the British, the Germans bombed your cities, and you didn't want to go easy on them. Like, how do you think we feel? And of course, Churchill was like, wow, Pearl Harbor's not London, right? But that was, we had our blood up for the Japanese, yeah. And so that was, there's this idea, the Japanese military doctrine in the 19th century was absolutely centered on draw your opponent into one battle and crush them, just like you did to the Russians. And they never learned that not all wars go that way, right? And so they kept trying to draw us into this one, you just get the American Navy, one big battle, and just crush it. And it's like, well, that doesn't work, right? And then you end up with Midway and the Coral Sea and whatever, and then you end up losing the war.
In fact, Nicholas II.
Yeah, and almost Nicholas II and President Roosevelt are not the same level of stupid, and beating Nicholas II is like, good for you, I guess. Like, you beat a guy widely considered to be the least effective ruler in the history of Europe, and like, Roosevelt is not that dumb, right? Roosevelt knew that he did not know as much as his generals and listened to them. Nicholas didn't do that, right? But yeah, that's absolutely why the Japanese have this attitude that just like, of course we can, of course we win, of course. They had this attitude in World War II. They totally underestimated us. To use George W. Bush's phrase, they misunderestimated us, right? And they totally did, because their past experience led them to believe that Europeans aren't all that tough anyway, right? I mean, it's all, the Chinese would say they're a paper tiger, right? You seem tough, but you're not.
But some of the Japanese leadership expected that.
that's Yamamoto, right? And so a quote much disputed in authenticity, but he did say to the Japanese government, "I can run wild in the Pacific for 6 months. After that, I have no confidence that we would be able to keep the Americans from doing what they want." And so, yeah, absolutely. The Japanese had this idea that for most of them was like, of course, the Americans are a bunch of shopkeepers and the Steers and Roebuck's catalog, and they're drunk and stupid. But Yamamoto, who had been to America, was like, I don't really think that that's actually the way it would be, right? Like, I think actually it would be different. And so, the point about talking about Japan is that we will return to this discussion later, right? If you haven't noticed, we're foreshadowing a little bit of World War II. But also, this is the best law of unintended consequences, right? If you talk to Matthew Perry, he said, "Gosh, Commodore, you drag Japan into the modern world. Isn't that great? Those Japanese people are going to have modern educations, they're going to have modern medicine, they're going to have modern technology." And it's like, well, yeah, but also you've sort of created your own Frankenstein's monster, right? It will come back to get you in the end, right? You can't control what people are going to do when you unleash these sort of processes, right? So the next thing we can mention briefly is we'll talk about Hawaii. Hawaii is a much more interesting case study. The Hawaiian Islands were discovered in the 1700s by British Captain Cook. They called them the Sandwich Islands, which is stupid. And we thank God we don't use that name anymore. Instead, we call them Hawaii because that's what the locals call it. So that's a quality name, right? You ask them what you call it, they tell you Hawaii, and you say okay. And so the Hawaiian Islands are interesting because in around the turn of the millennium, in 1000 or so, the Polynesian peoples began to migrate out of Southeast Asia, and they began to settle the Pacific Ocean, all those little islands on the southern rim of the Pacific Ocean. It's one of the greatest feats of exploration and discovery in the entire history of the human race. They sailed without really much in the way of metal technology. They had no navigational equipment. They navigated by the stars and the skies. They discovered these islands that are thousands of miles apart from each other with limited resources. And there was a big pause in the migration. A couple hundred years into this sort of slow process, they stopped and they started up again for some reason which we were not able to figure out. No one knows quite why. So if you like movies, by the way, the movie Moana is in fact exactly about that mysterious pause in Polynesian immigration, which stopped and then started again. And so large numbers of the Polynesians, they kept in touch with each other, right? They sailed around, they established these sort of societies, they had island groups that were united in kingdoms, they had trade with each other. Some groups of them went far afield and got sort of separated. Easter Island, memorably, was settled by Polynesians who forgot or lost the technology to make sailing ships and navigational technologies, and they became isolated, they died out, they ran out of food. Hawaiian Islands, similarly, were settled by a group of Polynesians. They kept some boat building, canoes and things, but they lost that long distance or ocean navigating technology. They stopped doing it, and they sort of if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. And so when Captain Cook discovered the islands, they were fairly heavily populated, but generally by disparate kingdoms that fought wars with each other all the time. And the big thing about Hawaiian wars is they were a great way to keep the population in check, right? When the islands get too many people, you might eat all the food, but that's fine, we'll pick a fight with the neighboring kingdom and everybody will die and we'll just start it over again, right? And so the Americans quickly became involved in the Hawaiian Islands, particularly Methodist missionaries. And so there were lots and lots of Methodist missionaries came and are very heavily proselytized on the Hawaiian Islands. And the big industry that rapidly developed was the sugarcane industry. That was the thing that became very quick. There was no big American domestic place to grow sugarcane outside of some places in Louisiana and South Florida, which are very remote. South Florida is not easily reachable by railroad until the 20th century, and it's too hot to really live in without air conditioning. And so Louisiana, in the delta of the Mississippi, there's some sugarcane, but the sugarcane companies wanted to invest in sugarcane somewhere that would be friendly to America, so it would not be run by European companies. So they started planting sugarcane in Hawaii. Right? The Dole is the other big company that had fruit plantations in Hawaii as well. Right? And the Hawaiians didn't like this. As the Americans began to become very predominant. The American sugarcane companies, by the way, lobbied and got Congress to repeal a tax on imported sugar that would have taxed them from importing it from a foreign country, basically, which is what Hawaii is. They also bought a huge chunk of land, somewhat dubiously, in Oahu, and they gave it to the American military as a naval base. Pearl Harbor is what it is. Which, by the way, in the days of battleships, Pearl Harbor's great. It's got a central island you could build docks on. It's got a big deep lagoon with a very narrow channel called the Slot that only one ship can come in and out at a time. If you have battleships, that's a perfect place to keep them safe and protected. You build guns all over the harbor mouth so that no one can attack. And the big hurricanes that hit the Pacific typhoons, they just don't even affect Pearl Harbor at all, right? The worst hurricane in the world could be happening and no ship is going to sink in the harbor, right? Now, of course, if someone were to invent a machine